Okay, well, it says we're live, so welcome to the Critical Christian Podcast.
We're your hosts, Dan.
And Justice? Dan and Justin. And we ask critical questions about the Bible and provide what can only be described as questionable answers.
And we'll edit that last part out.
Yeah, except for everyone watching it live. You'll hear that live.
Mm-hmm.
Dan, what are we reading today? What chapter?
This would be Genesis 38.
Yeah.
That was it, just Genesis
38. All right. Yeah, Genesis 38.
It sounded like I was going to say more.
It sounded like something profound was about to be said, and then it didn't happen. All right, so we're going to be covering the story of Tamar and Judah, and we're also going to be talking about the possible sin of onanism, also called colloquially as choking the chicken, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. When I was in youth group, I don't know about you, when I was in youth group, this passage was used to beat us young men over the head to tell us that masturbation was sinful.
Right.
Right?
Are we allowed to say that word?
I don't know. Well, we already said it, so now it's too late.
All right.
That being said, having read the passage many times now as an adult, I'm not sure I actually agree with that interpretation of the passage, but let's not make the people wait. Let's go ahead and read the passages and see what they say.
All right. Genesis 38:1.
Mm-hmm.
It came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira.
It's a catchy name.
They're all catchy names.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that Adullamite is just some random tiny little tribe in Canaan?
It kind of is, actually. So there's a bunch of really interesting connections in this narrative that unless you're reading it slowly, it's hard to pick up on. But the whole narrative is kind of about Judah, not the person, about the person, obviously, but there's a lot of connections with Judah, the tribe, and with King David and his association with being from the tribe of Judah. But the city in reference here is a Canaanite town that is actually located within the border of Judah. So when the 12 tribes come back to the land and they make their borders, this little town is, interestingly enough, within the border of Judah. So I'm sure it was remembered quite fondly, or at least quite easily through history, because it was connected to, we'll say, the founder of the whole tribe, right? So that being said, the city itself is not all that important, other than the fact that David, at one point in his life, actually had to hide out there in a cave, which was really interesting. So there's a connection with this town and with David, and there's also a connection as well with Tamar. Okay, so Tamar, in this narrative we're about to read, basically gets mixed up in an illicit sexual union, right? We might even consider it sexual assault, based on the fact that she had no other option than to provide a son through these particular means. But that being said, there's another Tamar that shows up in the Old Testament, which is the daughter of King David. And the daughter of King David is sexually assaulted by one of her brothers, whose name is not all that dissimilar from Onan. His name was Amnon. I mean, it's not the same name, but you could see how the ear could easily say, oh, it sounds really familiar. So, interestingly enough, we've got a town in this narrative that's associated with David, in the tribe that David is associated with, and the name of the young woman in question is the name of one of David's daughters, and the name of one of the men in the story that does the bad act is very similar to the name of one of David's children that does the bad act. Now, there's more. The wife that Judah takes is never named. Have you noticed that throughout the chapter? It's like she's not important, right?
Oh, yeah. They mentioned that
she's the daughter.
Her sons died.
Well, yeah.
But I don't think we heard her name, did we?
Yeah, so Judah's wife is never actually named. It just calls her the daughter of Shua. And interestingly enough, if you go back to biblical Hebrew before they added vowels to it, the name Shua definitely could have been pronounced Shiva. because the U vowel in the middle of that is the same as the V if you take away the vowel and make it a consonant, which you could have done in biblical Hebrew. Now, when you go to the Greek translation of the Old Testament, it does exactly that. It translates it, rather than saying Shua, it translates it as Shiva. Now, if this woman is the daughter of Shiva, then she's identified in this passage as Bat Shiva, which is, the Bat is daughter in Hebrew, right? Which sounds uncannily like Bathsheba.
Are you saying that maybe these two stories story at one point?
I don't think so, actually, in this particular case. I just find it really interesting. I think at some point when the narratives were being edited, somebody had a little bit of fun editing this narrative.
Coming up with their fake names?
Perhaps.
Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, at least maybe with her lineage. We don't really know who she is or who she might have been the daughter of, other than what the narrative tells us. I just think it's very interesting that there's all of these connections between this narrative and with King David. Really interesting. I don't know if it means anything. Like, you know what I mean? It could just be a mere coincidence. It could mean absolutely nothing. I just thought there's a lot of really weird coincidences through here.
Like all the coincidences between Kennedy and Lincoln, you know?
Right, exactly. We don't, obviously, we have no idea if any of those things are meaningful, other than some of them could have been self-fulfilling. You know, Kennedy could have done something to link himself with somebody from the past, right? It's also true, and this was a thought I had, that David understood his own history. He might have knew this story. There were 10 generations between this story and David, okay? It's possible that David knew his own family history and chose to name his children Tamar and Amnon because he knew of names in his lineage, right? So it could just be self-fulfilling connections. We don't know that.
Except I don't know why you would name your children after Onan.
Well, that's the thing, is Onan's not a good person in this narrative.
We'll get to that.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all I had to say about the first verse.
There's a lot to say.
There's a lot to say for a very short passage, but when I started looking at Dulamite, I started reading some of the David narratives. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about all these things. And then I opened up a good commentary, and the guy writing the commentary is like, hey, look at all these connections with David. I'm like, yeah, I just saw those. That's very interesting. Of course, he's also believes they don't really mean anything. It could just be mere coincidence.
Yeah.
But it is interesting nonetheless.
Are we recording?
We're not recording. YouTube's recording.
Oh, okay.
So as we're live streaming right now, YouTube will make this video available when we're done.
Oh, how neat.
Right? So let's move on to the next verse, huh?
Let's do it. Maybe I'll have something to say on this.
Maybe. Well, you wrote down stuff on it.
Oh, goody. Maybe I'll steal some of your stuff.
You can, yeah.
You know the 45th chapter of the book of Jasher also lists her name as Eliath?
Yeah.
Who knew? I mean, I knew, but you didn't know.
Absolutely. I didn't know that. That's one of the funny things about rabbinic writings and extra biblical writings. They try so hard to fill in the gaps. And so they made up a name for her. And a lineage. They actually tell you her lineage in the extra biblical literature.
Somebody's got to know that they're full baloney, right?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say, but I do know that because Judaism was around for so long, a lot of people did not like it when there was gaps in the narrative. And they did their best to fill in those gaps.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. There's no way to see if anybody's watching, huh?
I don't really know, to be honest. I mean, we could log into the YouTube website and see if someone's watching, but does it matter?
Yeah. All right, Genesis 38:2.
That's right.
And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went in unto her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name as an error, I presume. Oh, I wonder if that's where that comes from.
It's not.
No. She conceived again and bore a son and called his name Onan. I don't know much about this kind of stuff, but isn't it like a no-no to marry a Canaanite?
Yeah.
I mean, Esau, he married one, but found out he was wrong, and he's like, okay, I'll marry a non-Canaanite, But Judah, by this point, probably should have known better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then, okay.
Absolutely. No, I agree. It's a big no-no to marry a Canaanite woman. If you read the rabbinic writings, they tried to wash this away.
Okay. How?
Well, as it turns out, the word for someone from Canaan can also be translated as like a merchant or a trader. So there's a number of writings and even what's the word I'm looking for? Targums, where they basically make it appear as though, no, it's not actually a Canaanite woman. Mm-hmm. Our beloved Judah, the leading tribe of Israel, did not, dirty himself with a Canaanite woman. And so they're like, we're going to pick the alternate translation, say that she was the, of a trader or a merchant, but that doesn't actually fit because remember, she's from that town that he visited, presumably, right? Mm-hmm. Adullam. So if that's the case, she's from a Canaanite city. Mm-hmm. So why wouldn't she be a Canaanite if she's from a Canaanite city? And the person that's mentioned, Hira, who went with him, is never mentioned again as being of Hebrew descent. We don't know if he's Hebrew. He very well could have been a Canaanite as well. Mm-hmm. But as far as we can tell, it seems like Judah's hanging out with Canaanites.
Yeah.
Right?
Pretty crazy.
But there's only so many of them anyways. There's 12 sons.
Right.
And then their wives and children, presumably. So it's like, if you hang out with somebody outside of your nuclear family, your only choice is to hang out with a Canaanite or an Egyptian.
Yeah. I don't know if God or whoever thought this through, to have them not marry Canaanite.
Well, it's awfully difficult because when you get to having 12 sons, okay, all of them have to marry somebody.
Right.
And remember, they're not allowed to marry Canaanites, but they're living in Canaan. Mm-hmm. So where are they going to go to get their wives?
Right.
Right? All of them basically have to leave their home to get wives.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Wild.
It is wild.
Based on what we know, though, most of them had wives. 75 of them went down into Egypt when they went, which means that most of them probably married. Anyways, let's read on.
Sure.
It is odd, though, as you say, that Judah just kind of, is fraternizing with Canaanite women, and the biblical text says nothing about it.
I like how you said that Canaan could mean merchant. Mm-hmm. It's really, convenient.
Right? Is that really convenient or not? Oh, boy.
Did you already read this?
Mm-mm.
Then let's read it.
About the names, yeah.
Yeah.
I was actually curious because you do like to look up the meaning of names.
Yeah.
And go ahead with what you wrote down.
Because usually the names are added later.
Right. It seems that way.
Yeah, Mm-hmm. Means awake. Mm-hmm. And Onan means strength or power. Mm-hmm. It also means masturbation in some current languages. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Shelah means petition or prosper.
Right. I did look up some of the names in the original Hebrew, and they mostly aligned with what you had discovered in your research. And so one thing that struck me is up to this point, almost everybody's name coincided with their role in the story. Mm-hmm. This seems to be the first collection of names where they don't seem like they're contrived in order to fit the narrative. It's just random people's names. Mm-hmm. And that to me is really interesting. I think this is the first occurrence of that, right?
I have no idea.
I think it is.
I mean, yes, it is.
Yeah. So that here's what I think about this story. I've poo-pooed over a lot of the stories in Genesis.
Yeah.
And I've claimed a lot of them seem to be made up.
Right.
This is one story in Genesis. When I'm reading the details of it, there's no reason to make any of this up, and all the details ring true to me. The names of the characters don't actually coincide with their role in the story.
Mm-hmm.
The characters that in the Bible that are typically like heroes, like good characters, actually do terrible things in this particular narrative, right? You wouldn't write that about Judah unless it was true. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here that's if you were making up a narrative, you would not make this story up. That makes sense?
Yeah, unless they knew that's what people expected. And like, well, we've got to put some bad stuff in here so they think it's true.
It is. Yeah.
I don't know.
I suspect this story was really well known. And
I mean, I'm guessing it had to have been.
Right.
Otherwise, they would have loved to have cut it out, right?
Right.
But everybody would be like, hey.
But it's such a great story. We're going to get to the end. We're not going to spoil it. But like, it really is one of those stories. Like if you're watching a short movie, like you're going to like the ending of this. Like there's a real solid ending to it. I mean, there's still tragedy along the way.
Yeah. Yes, there is.
But I'm saying maybe the bad person in the story gets comeuppance.
I get what you're saying.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's a clever ending.
Yeah, it is clever. Yeah. I agree. Yeah. Verse 5.
And she yet again conceived and bore a son, and called his name Shelah, and he was at Chezib when she bore him. Is bear? Why is bear there?
You accidentally copied from the King James as opposed to the New King James.
Okay.
And they do things a little bit different.
Good reason. I assume there was some relevance to mentioning where Shelah was born. Was Chezib special? What it's worth, Chezib means disappointment or lying. So maybe that means something. Mm-hmm. Maybe we'll keep reading and find that Shelah does some bad things.
Well, so interestingly enough, the only child of Judah, the only son rather, that remains living,
right,
is Shelah.
Right.
And they list that the town he was born in, right?
Yeah.
It said about the town. The town's really interesting. So the town is another town located within Judah.
So Chezib is a town.
It's a Judean town,
and it means disappointment.
Yeah,
right.
It means disappointment. We're gonna get to that. Okay, so now later there's a clan called the Shelonites. And they also had a child that's listed in 1 Chronicles 4:22. There's a child born to the Shelonites named Kozeba, which seems to be in line with honoring the heritage of their forefather coming from Chezib. And I think that explains a couple things in terms of like how this town came to be connected with this particular character in the Judean history. Right. So obviously people from Judah were living there. And just like the other towns in Genesis, they want to know, well, how is this town named? Why do we call it this? Or why is it affiliated with so-and-so? And I think this is the explanation for how it became associated with that particular ancestor. Right. Now, there, as you mentioned, though, both of the root words, if you take the 3 consonant roots of the city, which is Chezib, and the son, which is Shelah, both of them mean either to deceive or to disappoint, which of course is interesting that one name does seem to kind of play into the narrative a little bit, but I'm not sure how much. Certainly, I would not say that the other 2 sons, their names seem to have anything to do with the story.
How could it be? How could she, the Shelah, be named because of a disappointment with Tamar?
Oh, because remember that was the last son that Judah had, who was supposed to go into Tamar and allow her to bear a child to preserve the lineage, right? So the fact that he was not given to Tamar is a disappointment.
I'm sure, but they wouldn't give him to Tamar as soon as he comes out of the womb, and they still have to name him something.
Well, we don't.
Do you think they waited till he was 20 to see if he was a disappointment to name him?
Well, that's the thing. It's a very good point. The name that we have here, as we pointed out, it seems to be the only name that's associated with the role that he played in the story. The other two boys, not so much. But that being said, even if these like this age gap were true, it still kind of would have been somewhat expected for this to happen because, your duty to this woman has nothing to do with whether or not it's convenient or if you love the woman or anything like that. Your duty is to provide an heir so that, she and her son can inherit the estate of the woman's dead husband.
We'll get to that.
We'll get there. Yeah, there's a lot to say on that, actually.
A lot I disagree with.
Yeah.
Ready?
Yeah.
Genesis 38, 6 through 7. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. So Judah finds a wife for his son and then God smites for nobody knows.
For being wicked.
For nobody knows. I mean, we back in the day there, wickedness was, didn't these guys get mauled by bears because they made fun of a guy's baldness?
Yeah, Elisha had a bunch of little boys, as the text says, make fun of his bald spot, and he cursed them, and God sent a bear, and the bear mauled 42 of the children.
Okay.
We don't know if they actually lived. I think, according to the translation, it implies that they did not live. But that being said, yeah, that happened. That was a thing.
Not really. Obviously, that's not a real story.
I do not believe that is a real story at all.
But I'm just saying, in the Bible, it seems like you don't have to do too much to be smoted by God.
Yeah, okay, so here's the thing, is there's sometimes you just get smitten by God, and you're like, what, this seemed kind of silly? Like, for example, the one guy reaches out and touches the ark by accident when they're carrying it because he trips, right? And God smites him. But then, the sons of Jacob destroy the entire town of the Shechemites, all of them by the sword, and then take their wives and children captive, and then, they take all the booty from their homes. And God's like, oh, well, whatever, nothing to see here.
I have only two choices when I hear stuff like that. Either dismiss it out of hand because it's crazy, or go, wow, I do not want to worship this God.
I can understand that.
And personally, I choose the former.
Yeah.
I don't believe this represents God in any way.
I wouldn't be inclined to think so either. And like we've said a lot, I think a lot of Genesis is mythology and we'll say mythological history, and that's fine. The only complaint that you'll hear is, well, it seems like, according to the New Testament authors, especially Paul, treat Genesis as though it is true. Like, it's true and it's accurate. It's legit, right?
Does Paul, or are there others?
Well, most of the New Testament authors do.
All right.
So that's the only hang up, is like, listen, if we say that this is just, a genre of writing that is loose, it's a historical fiction of some nature, trying to explain why things are the way they are. Well, that's fine. And that, honestly, I believe that's the way it was written to begin with. I think that's perfectly acceptable. The problem is that we have other biblical authors that believe that it's not that. They believe it's all 100% literal. So who's wrong?
Well,
us or them, right?
Obviously, unless God says, hey, that never happened, they're just going to continue believing like every other Jewish person, right?
Right.
So it would make sense for them to refer back to it because to them it's real.
Right.
It was written for people to believe it, correct?
It does seem that way. Yeah.
I mean, sure, nowadays we can look at it and go, no.
Yeah, there's no dome over the earth, right?
But back then, people were ready to believe anything.
Well, yeah. Well, they didn't have answers, right?
Right. So they were ready to believe anything.
Right. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. I know you always say that they would have no reason to include negative things about history, and therefore that likely makes this event real.
Mm-hmm.
However, the lack of details makes me wonder if this wasn't simply a story everyone knew, and so had to be included. But they were also trying to gloss over it. Like, he did something bad and got smitten.
Mm-hmm.
That is all that happened. This press conference is over.
It's possible, too, that the crime committed is not actually important. It's possible they're like, let's just skip to the good part of the story.
The crime is the good part.
Well, we don't know that. We don't know what the crime is.
It probably was mowing the grass on a Saturday.
I mean, that would get you stoned.
Mm-hmm.
Even picking up sticks on the Sabbath. I mean, you're done.
Right.
Out of here, son. Yeah, maybe that's what happened.
Yeah, maybe they're embarrassed, so they don't want to actually say.
Maybe. It's important to remember, though, that at this point in time, the law of Moses had not been given.
Mm-hmm.
But, of course, that does not prevent the biblical editors from trying to read the law into some of these passages.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess we'll get to that. But
yeah, I guess at this point, they're only living by their morals or something. I don't.
Kind of. We're somewhat led to believe from the Bible that there was some kind of law given to the people before the law of Moses that was communicated through God.
Okay.
But we don't know the details of it. We don't know how it was necessary for them. We don't know what the requirements were.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know much. We know that you can't eat the blood of the animal. Remember, we read that after the Noah narrative.
Yeah, I remember that.
I'm gonna bring it out on the ground there.
Yeah, and then we determined that that's the first time they ever ate animal flesh.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Eh?
I think it's true.
Look it up, people.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Well, let's see. On this part of the story, referring to some of we mentioned that the name doesn't seem to coincide with his role in the story, but this did not sit well with some of the rabbis. So if you read some of the Jewish literature, they actually tried to find a reason for, well, what was his crime, and why isn't this person's name seem to be meaningful to the story? And there's a couple of Jewish rabbis that I found where they basically said, look, if you reverse the spelling of the name in Hebrew, it could actually mean to be displeasing, which is really interesting. I don't know if that's something you should be doing, is just reversing people's names to see what it says. Right? But by the same logic, then they assumed, okay, so if that's true, if his name can be taken in one way or another to mean that he's displeasing, then that allows us to know that he did something that was displeasing enough that God unalived him. But they never did come up with a reason what that displeasing thing might have been. But some of them said that it's possible that the thing that he did that was displeasing was refusing to consummate the marriage with Tamar, which is why they didn't have a son. Remember, because he passed away, God smote him, and there was no son. But if in fact they were married, typically you got pregnant pretty quick because they had no contraception, right?
Well, maybe he was sterile.
So, well, he could have been sterile, but a lot of the ancient Jewish rabbis believed that it wasn't that he was sterile; it was that he refused to have sex with his wife, which is why they were without child, and also why, if you read his name backwards, it means to be displeasing.
Why would he refuse to do that?
I'm not saying that I believe this theory. I'm just saying this is what the rabbis made of it, in history.
Because they had to have a reason. That made sense.
That's right. Remember, part of the Jewish literature was to fill in the gaps, because everybody reading these stories from childhood or listening to the stories, just like you and I, heard the story and were like, well, I got questions, right? And who are you going to ask? Ask the rabbi. And so they had to come up with answers. And this was one of the answers they came up with. So I don't know if it's a good one, but it's the only one I could find.
It seems like being smoted by God is a big enough deal that you'd want to, I don't know, include why it happened. I don't know.
Unless the smiting is really just a plot device to get you into the story.
That's very possible.
Right? Yes. What if these are all just tertiary details so that they can get to the good part of the story?
That's actually pretty possible, isn't it?
Right.
Just why they gloss over it, because it doesn't mean anything.
Just like when you're watching a movie, the first section of the movie, they got to introduce all those characters.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And they got to lay down the groundwork. That's probably what's happened here.
Got it.
Okay. 8 through 10.
And Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and marry her and raise up an heir to your brother. But Onan knew that the heir would not be his, and it came to pass when he went into his brother's wife that he emitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, therefore he killed him also.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack here.
There's some things.
So God killed Onan's brother, and so their father Judah told Onan to have sex with Er's wife because this way his brother's lineage wouldn't die. I mean, that's what it says, right?
Yeah.
Even though it does die, I mean, surely they knew that children were at the very least a combination of their mother and father, right?
They didn't know that.
I mean, if you don't have children and you die, that's your lineage. It's gone.
But they believe that your lineage comes through the father, and that the woman is just a receptacle for the seed. She's the ground that you plant the seed in.
Okay.
So your lineage is directly from your father, not from your mother.
Okay.
So you need a son for that.
They're trying to preserve Er's lineage, right?
They're trying to preserve Er's lineage and also his family estate.
Why would he have any?
Well, because they were supposed to take over the land of Canaan and, more or less subdue it, fill it up. Right?
Sure.
And part of that is by being fruitful, multiplying, and passing on your estate and whatnot.
I mean, he must have died pretty young. So maybe he didn't even have much.
Well, we're not told, but we assume he has something, or else it wouldn't have mattered, right? Now, here's the interesting thing. Somebody pointed this out to me a long time ago is, at the time that this was all going on, the Mosaic law was not given. The law about levirate marriage, meaning you have to marry your brother's wife and provide an offspring so that their name will not be blotted out. As it turns out, I did a little bit of digging. It's actually pretty common in the ancient Near East, even outside of the Bible. So I wrote down two of them. One is from, well, first of all, let's read the biblical law. Deuteronomy 25 says, if brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside of the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother will go into her and take her as a wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed to the name of his dead brother. That is the name, that this name may not be blotted out of Israel. Okay, so easy enough. Now, in the Middle Assyrian laws, I was actually a little bit surprised, and the Hittite laws, that we have something very similar. So Middle Assyrian law number 33 says, if a woman is still living in her father's house and her husband died and she has sons, she shall live where she chooses in a house of theirs, meaning one of the sons. If she has no son, her father-in-law shall marry her to the son of his choice. And and then there's a break in the text. And then it says, he may give her in marriage to her father-in-law. And then it says, if her husband and her father-in-law are both dead, and she has no son, she becomes a widow, and she may go anywhere she wishes. Now, the Hittite law 193, is not quite so broken. It reads pretty cleanly. It says, if a man has a wife, and the man dies, his brother shall take his wife, then his father shall take her. That's a tough one. If in turn also the father dies, one of the brother's sons shall take the wife whom he had, there shall be no punishment. So this is something really interesting. If the woman dies, her husband dies, she has to marry the brother. If there is no brother, then it's the father. If it happens that the father can't perform this duty for one reason, it's actually going to be one of her friggin' nephews, one of her husband's brother's sons in the Hittite law code. So the idea that it's silly that Judah's third son, Shelah, being 16 years younger probably than Tamar, would one day grow up and then provide a son for her brother, seemed, I think, pretty normal for the time period. In fact, if in the Hittite law code you're expected to marry one of your nephews, if that's the case, then I think what we're reading in Genesis 38 seems pretty in keeping. Pretty wild stuff.
Yeah, so it just means that in the Bible and outside the Bible, people were pretty messed up. This
was an expected cultural norm, and the most disturbing part for me with the levirate marriage has always been the fact that the woman does not actually have any consent here.
But you know what? The man doesn't either.
No, that's right. The man doesn't actually have any consent either, does it?
No. I mean, imagine growing up and being like, I'm going to get me a wife and blah, 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 blah. And then they're like, hey, you got to marry this 30-year-old chick. 30-year-old, not dirty old.
Right.
That sounded, yeah.
Right. Now, who benefits from this?
Let's see. I mean, obviously the woman, right?
I don't know.
Because she's taken care of.
Right.
That's it, though.
It seems to be the method. What they're saying is this is how the widow will not be left destitute.
Right.
But could it not also be true that they would just say, hey, listen, if the woman becomes widowed, she gets a portion of her dead husband's estate.
Yeah, like all of it.
Right.
Like that's how it works in modern society.
But women could not own property typically because they were property unless they were actually specifically given property or had money to purchase property from somebody and they were of high status.
Well, I mean, they would be given property that way.
We do see in the Hammurabi law code, there are provisions for women to own property, even in the case of divorce. If a woman divorces or is divorced by her husband, but she's had children, she's actually going to get a portion of the husband's estate. And this is true also in the law code of Eshnunah. In the law code of Eshnunah, if you divorce your wife, you owe her a portion of your estate so that she can take care of herself and the children.
Seems like some of them were pretty progressive for their time, huh?
Yes. So they're a little bit all over the place. I would categorize the Hittite law code and the Middle Assyrian law codes to be very similar to the law code in the Bible. I actually think the code of Hammurabi is somewhat progressive on many fronts. And the same thing with the law code of like Lapid Ishtar, which is
more progressive than what we find in, I don't know, Leviticus.
Yeah, Leviticus is tough read.
So.
There's some stuff in there, buddy. There's some stuff in there. So anyways, all that being said, even if we conclude that the law of Moses did not apply here, it seems that this practice is just embedded into the culture.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So no, there's really no getting around it. She had to sleep with one of her, brother-in-laws.
Right.
Now, interestingly enough, in the Bible, a father is not supposed to sleep with his daughter-in-law, right? But that law does not apply. Moses had not come yet. But we did just read in the Hittite law code that is actually expected. That if there's no brother to provide a son, it's actually the job of the father to do that, right? So as far as I can tell, that means Tamar did not do anything wrong by sleeping with her father-in-law. In fact, that would have been his duty in the first place if they were following the custom of the time period.
Well, why didn't she just say that then? Hey, let's do this thing.
Well, she was waiting for Shelah.
Yeah, but
we'll get there. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves.
Oh,
right. Right.
Wow. That's a lot of writing.
Yeah, you wrote a lot on this passage.
So, is such a bad guy that God himself intervened. However, this God didn't care about Rumid and whoever it was.
Levi.
Simeon? Levi?
I forget which one. I thought it was Reuben or Simeon and Levi.
Oh, well.
Anyhow. Wasn't Reuben the one that, raped his mother?
Oh, yeah, right. Okay. The point is they massacred an entire village. And
yeah, all of them.
And or had to have done something 1,000,000 times worse to get smoted, right? I mean...
And they sold their brother into slavery.
Yeah. They weren't very good people.
Yeah.
But it was all for God's greater plan. All right.
God has a plan.
Uh-huh. So it's not really about keeping this one man lineage alive then, right? Because that would make no sense.
Actually, that's a really good point. Okay, so one of the overarching themes in the narrative is that this person's name should not be blotted out from Israel.
Uh-huh.
But God himself is blotting this dude out.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like you're trying to preserve this dude, and God's saying, "Don't do it. I smote him. Get him out of here. We don't need him."
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a wild juxtaposition there.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, God already knows how babies are made, even if the stupid hillbillies don't. Right?
Yeah, and according to the Old Testament, God is the one who, quote unquote, opens the womb and allows them to conceive. Is it possible that God prevented him from having a son because he was so wicked?
That's very possible.
But how wicked do you have to be to get smitten by God? Because we've already read many times up till now that God's people do terrible, terrible things.
I mean, I presume had to probably set off like a nuclear bomb or something.
Must have.
Just destroy all of Canaan.
Yeah, I don't...
And then God's like, all right, that's too much.
Yeah, well, he ate a bunch of pork.
That might have been it, actually.
That put him over the top. Oh, boy.
So he sprays his man juice on the ground.
Onan, right? Yep. Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. And that's it. He had sex for pleasure and not for procreation?
I don't think that's what's happened here. Well, okay. It is true that he had sex for pleasure. Okay. Here's my take on it. I don't think he was punished for spilling his seed. I don't think God really cares if you spill your seed, right? Because even in the Bible, it's expected that you're going to have sometimes accidental nocturnal emissions, right?
Talks about that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where?
It's in the law codes.
Leviticus?
I forget which book, but I'm pretty sure it's Leviticus.
Wow, that's crazy. Okay.
So it is somewhat expected that you're going to spill your seed at some point in time, and you're never unalived for it, right? What seems to be happening here is that he's kind of committing two crimes. One, first of all, he had sex with his sister-in-law on a lie. The premise was that he's going to provide a son, but then he pulled out, right? Which means he lied to her. The second thing is, not only did he lie to her, it seems to me that it's probably true that he participated in this lie willingly because he wanted to have sex with the woman, right? Knowing that he wasn't going to, get her pregnant. Now, let's just recognize, though, that his pullout game must have been unbelievable. I don't know how many times I don't know how many times he went into her, but I know that if you do it enough, it doesn't matter if you got a good pullout game.
All right, be careful. This is live.
Yeah. No matter how good your pullout game is, somebody might be getting conceived, right? So I think his crime was not spilling his seed. His crime was doing his sister-in-law dirty.
Why did he not want a child?
I believe the reason why he didn't want a child is because, according to tradition, if your brother dies with no one to leave the estate to, you actually get a portion of that estate. You might actually get all of that estate. And even if that's not true, it might go up for redemption. So you might actually be able to just purchase the estate if it's not flat out given to you. So it seems to me like what he wanted to do was to inherit the estate of his brother because it had nobody else to go to in the family. If he would have provided sons for his brother's widow, he knows that first of all, he's going to have to raise the child. Second of all, he's not going to get the estate. The estate's going to go to the sons. He's going to get nothing.
Yeah, I mean, he gets it until they're of age, right?
Well, theoretically, yeah. So that's the case. If it's true that he even has children, he might not legally have ownership of the estate, but he has use of the estate, which means he could theoretically grow crops, have camels and donkeys and livestock and whatnot, and maybe benefit some way that way, right? But it seems to me like he wanted everything for himself, right? And I think that's the crime happening here. I don't think there's really a crime in the fact that he spilt seed.
So Judah had sons named and Onan. Did he have other sons?
Shelah.
And that one was the one that was supposed to marry Tamar, but didn't. I feel like Judah has very bad sons, or he's a bad father, or I don't know what.
Well, that's an interesting point because two of his sons are so wicked that God has to smite them.
Right.
And then Judah himself is a bit of a douche in the story.
Yeah.
So it does not look good for the immediate lineage of Judah. Like, it looks very bad. But this is the tribe that God props up and picks to be, his chosen, his favorite son. Right. Really interesting. That's one of the reasons why I feel like this story almost has to be true, or they definitely would have edited the story to make Judah somehow appear a little less terrible, right?
Right.
Because remember, the last territory to edit the Bible were the Judeans,
right?
And they did edit it, buddy. They did. You can see all the places where they artificially prop up Judah over everybody else.
And I'm sure they would have loved to have cut this out of it.
They would have, right? So that's why I'm saying this is probably a really old story. Probably everybody knew it. And it was probably just part of the, the cultural zeitgeist. And if they would have changed it, somebody would have caught them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
probably be harder to unite both of the factions, right?
Right. Yeah.
All right. I'm not entirely sure what the message the original author was trying to convey is, but I think it's pretty safe to assume God had no part in this. I mean, I know it grows tiresome always having to defend God from the Bible.
I mean, he's in the story. He smites people.
I mean, it's his supposed divinely inspired word. So I'm not here to say that God is bad. I truly believe God is good. It's just that I'm not sure it's fair to describe God based on the Bible, or at least Genesis, which really feels like some bad Israelite fan fiction.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if Genesis really portrays God in a way that is congruent with the rest of the biblical narrative.
Right. I mean, when you think of God, you're like, God is love. Well, take out Genesis and maybe that's true, you know?
Right.
I mean, there's so many things you gotta, for apologetics, there's so many things that you're gonna have to argue with people about for Genesis when you could just say, yeah, this is not real.
Right, because so far in Genesis, remember, God doesn't know all things.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't know if Abraham's going to pass the test of faith.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't know if the outcry from Sodom is as severe as what he heard.
Mm-hmm.
He has to physically go down to inspect it, and the tower.
Mm-hmm.
He has to physically walk in the garden to find Adam. He doesn't know where he's at. The God of Genesis seems to be a very archaic God that matches what we read in the rest of the ancient Near East.
Yeah,
and
right.
Doesn't really match what we read in the latter part of the Bible, where God is, omnipotent, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, so on and so forth.
I mean, I'd also take Job out as well, right?
Job's a train wreck.
Because I think it's pretty obvious that's just a story.
It is, yeah. Job was never meant to be history.
I say that because I just heard on the radio today they were talking about Job. Right. And I'm like, these people believe this,
Some people do.
First, I used to, but then I realized that makes no sense.
No. You won't find a serious biblical scholar who writes commentaries on Job that thinks it's a legit story. All of them understand that this is written basically as a historical fiction to explain a very deep theological point. Right. If it's true, then the first question that needs to be asked is, well, who in the world's writing all this down? Because most of this is just dialogue between God and Job with nobody around, other than when his three friends are visiting him.
Well, the question is, who wrote Job?
Right. And who was there to hear the conversation anyways?
Who decided to write Job?
It certainly would have had to have been Job. But imagine the conversation we're having tonight about this one chapter. If you go tomorrow to write down this entire conversation, how much of it are you going to remember?
2%.
Right. So the book of Job, if in fact it is history, probably had to have been written by Job, and God would have had to have given him some sort of miracle of memory, or God would have had to dictate the story to somebody else who is just an unnamed author.
You know what? I don't know about that, because it seems like in the New Testament, everybody remembers everything Jesus said.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So that was it.
Yeah. Anyways, so can we move into the next
verse? The thing is, when they were deciding which books to include, they must have assumed Job was real, right? And not just some sort of allegory or analogy or metaphor or simile or...
I bet it was a mixture of both, but some people did believe that it was a theological work of fiction, and I believe some people thought it was true. Right, there was probably a little bit of division there. The New Testament authors believe it's true. It seems that way, at least.
That's problematic, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's hard to tell. That Job is not mentioned often in the New Testament, and what is mentioned is very difficult to tell if they're referencing it as a piece of literary history, or just saying like, "Hey, this is according to the narrative. Here's a point that I'm going to pull out for illustration."
I get that.
Right.
All right.
See, verse 11a.
11a. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown." For he said, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So, how old is Tamar at this point? Why do we just assume Shelah will want to have sex with her?
Well, it's hard to know how old she is. She could be anywhere between 20 and 30, maybe 20 and 35, because we're not really told. But I'm sure she was married young to the first man.
Yeah.
But I think one thing is clear. I don't think Shelah or Tamar really want to have sex with each other. Yeah. Right? This seems to be like a cultural necessity. This is not something that either one of them technically is desiring.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell.
I mean, it seems like Tamar was into it.
Well, she wants a son.
Right.
Right. But I don't think that she's looking forward to the sexual encounter with now the third son of Judah, right? She just wants to get the damn thing over with,
Yeah.
and get herself an heir, right? I assume after she produces an offspring with Shelah, if it came to that, I assume she wouldn't have sex with him again afterwards, right? I mean, legally speaking, maybe she would have been allowed to, right? But I don't know if that's actually what would happen. I suspect he would have just said, "Okay, I did my duty. Now, raise your children," right?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that Judah mentions that Shelah may also die, same way as man or
Right, right.
I mean, I guess he might just be saying that he could also die at some point. But Judah is what, 0 for 2 here, and he still worshiping the God that killed his 2 sons.
That's a good point. So if we assume that Judah is still worshiping, we're gonna call him Yahweh. I have to assume that he understood that his 2 sons were terrible and wicked, and that what God did must have been justified.
You know what? I was thinking about that, but I also thought maybe that's not true. Maybe he's just incredibly scared of God.
Yeah. Well, do you know? We don't know if Judah knows what we know. Okay, we know, according to the story, that God took those 2 sons out. We don't know if Judah knows that part, because he only knows that they died.
Okay, maybe they got eaten by bears or something.
Yeah, we do not know if is it possible that Judah suspects that this young woman is poisoning her sons. Like we don't know what's happening. We do not know at all if Judah understands why his sons are being killed. It's possible that he might think that something's wrong with this woman. Maybe she's got a disease that she's spreading to her.
It's also possible that God had nothing to do with their death.
And that it was just attributed to God.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's possible that they just died of natural means, and that the authors and or editors of the story attributed it to God and said, well, okay, well, if God did this thing, it must have been because they were wicked. And I think that's probably the most likely scenario in real life, is they probably died of some horrible thing, and the author was like, well, God took them.
Man, that would suck, right?
Yeah.
Just for the rest of your eternity.
But think about this. You only have 3 sons.
Yeah.
Your first son marries a woman, dies. Your second son quasi marries the same woman, dies. Your third son, you're like, I ain't falling for this a third time. I don't know what's going on in that household, but my last son ain't going over there. We ain't doing this.
Right.
You know what I mean? I can actually relate with Judah here. He don't have any more sons right now. Yeah. He's only got to 3. He might have more later. Actually, he does have more later. But yeah, so I think Judah, his apprehension to give his last son is warranted.
I guess that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, let's see. Was Tamar's husband?
First husband.
And then after that, Onan was our second husband.
Basically, yeah, he had to go into her,
and
as
then
it says.
Third would have been Shelah?
Would have been, yes.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
I didn't even get his name right.
You're doing pretty good here. You're going to remember these names after this.
Nope. All right. You got anything else?
I think we're on to verses 12 through 14.
Now, in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place which was on the way to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given him. It was as a wife. There. All right. Yeah, so, I mean, I was going to ask why they didn't get married, but it seems because nobody really wanted to.
Right.
Or at least Shelah didn't want to.
I agree.
Probably saw a Black Widow.
Yeah. I think, as we already stated, Judah never intended to give his last son away, right? That seems implied. What I am curious about is for the second time, we have the name Hira the Adulamite. Again, I find this wild because like he shows up in the story multiple times by name, but we are never told the name of like Judah's wife, who seemingly would have been way more important than this rando guy who was like, showing him where to get Canaanite wives and prostitutes from.
So is there extra biblical texts that might discuss Judah's wife more?
Yeah, there is some discussion on that. I didn't pull it for this conversation, but there is, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we can venture into that as we continue learning about the individual tribes throughout the coming books.
Right.
We're definitely going to dig into some of those genealogies because they show up in the text.
Oh, I love genealogies.
It's my favorite thing.
No. All right.
I think that there's not much else to say about that. I think we all know what's happening here, right?
Yeah, I thought that was good though.
Yeah.
The thing that you're about to say.
Oh, about the veiling. Oh yeah. So in the passage, remember it says that she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself and sat in an open place, right? So basically she's like, hey, I want to trick my father-in-law into sleeping with me.
Right, yeah.
And this is kind of odd because in Canaanite culture, typically the prostitutes would not be veiled.
I did not know this.
Right? So it seems likely that she's only veiling herself here as a means for disguising herself, right? But here's the thing. I am not convinced that veiling yourself is enough to disguise yourself from somebody that you know, like your father-in-law.
I get that.
Right?
But, I mean, it's possible he didn't want to believe,
It is possible.
Because he seemed to be really into her.
Yeah, here's the thing though, like, okay, remember when Lot slept with his two daughters?
Yeah.
We weren't buying it. Lot knew he was sleeping with his daughters, had to. You cannot get drunk enough to not know you're sleeping with your two daughters when you think all the rest of the humans on the planet got wiped out.
Especially since it was one night and then the next night, right?
Right.
So,
and then remember Jacob was tricked by his father-in-law Laban, given the wrong woman on the wedding night.
Right.
Was not buying that either. I do not believe that. Right. Now, a third time, we've got somebody being tricked into sleeping with someone that they should know and recognize, but they don't. And this time, it doesn't even appear like there's any alcohol involved, right? Because he hasn't even made it to his destination yet. This woman he finds along the way.
That's an interesting point.
So he finds her along the way. Now it is true that when you went to go shear your sheeps, just like during the harvest time, there was drinking and partying. It was a time of celebration, the whole townsmen would come together and there would be prostitutes there that the men would pay to sleep with. It was a big old party, right? But that being said, he slept with her before he even got there. And like, how do you not, this woman was married to two of your children. How do you not recognize her?
Mm-hmm.
And even if he didn't recognize her physically, would he not recognize her voice?
Well, I mean, we say the same thing for Isaac, right?
Yeah.
When he gave the blessing to
to the wrong child.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we thought that was weird. Like, his hearing had to be totally shot or something.
Right. Right.
A lot of these stories are really kind of similar in ways. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They're like, okay, so this is how we're going to talk about, sex. Now let's just do it every single time it comes up. You know? People will believe it, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know that they didn't typically veil themselves. So I'm surprised Judah wouldn't right then and there go, wait. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because typically in this region, veiling was a sign of like availability and authority. So if you were available for being taken as a bride, or if you were available for sex, you would not be veiled. If you were unavailable, you would have a veil on your head as a sign that you were taken or you were under somebody else's authority, right? And there's a number of law codes about this. I didn't pull them out. That I didn't want to make the whole passage about ancient Near Eastern law codes.
Yeah.
But suffice it to say, the practice that, interestingly enough, that she's following seems to be more Jewish in nature than Canaanite in nature. But there seems to be an expectation, like, so even in the Bible, there's an interesting passage in the Song of Solomon 1:7 where the woman, when she's talking to her lover, says, "Tell me, you who my soul loves, where do you pasture your flocks? Where do you, where do you have them lay down at noon? For why should I be like one who veils herself besides the flocks of your companions?" And this seems to be a reference saying that she does not want to be like one of the prostitutes that goes out and follows the flocks, looking to get action and money, right? And the person that she's referring to, if indeed it is a prostitute, is veiled, right? So if that's true, if what we have by the Old Testament standard is that prostitutes would be wearing a veil, it seems to me like the purpose of the veil is not as a sign of authority or a sign of availability, but basically a sign of we're going to say hiding yourself, hiding your identity, because this was not a practice that was encouraged in Jewish society or Hebrew society. This would have been a practice in other societies that were okay. And so therefore it wasn't that big of a deal. But I guess in this case, I think the veil is there to hide your identity so you're not shamed.
So, yeah. It's just weird. The whole thing, I mean, that Judah would still go along with this.
Do you think he knew and just didn't care?
I mean, at this point, we kind of have to assume that might be the case.
Well, let's read 15 through 16 before. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's read it and then we'll discuss.
All right.
I am.
When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot because she had covered her face. Then he turned to her by the way and said, "Please let me come into you." For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" It's just nasty.
Very classy the way they word things.
I don't care that she's his daughter-in-law. They aren't related in any way. However, there has to be a significant age difference, for one, right?
Right.
And two, this whole thing is just an odd conversation. A faceless chick. Can I have sex? Sure, Judah. I mean, random stranger. Also, give me a goat.
Right.
That's probably how it went.
Actually, you're not that far off. We're about to read that part here in a second. What's really interesting here is that Judah approaches her and does not say, like, "Hey, what's your price?" Or, what. The conversation starts with, "Let me come into you." But at least he said, "Please."
He's a romantic.
He's a romantic. He said, "Please," right? But the text does state that he did not know who she was, which I think is just flat out lie. You cannot convince me. But here's the one thing in defense of the Bible, okay? If it is true that he knew who she was, then I don't know if he would have been so easily tricked, which we're about to read here in a second. But let's read the next verse here and see about the trick.
All right.
I am. Sorry.
I'm charged. All right. See, 17 through 19. And he said, "I will send a young goat from the flock." So she said, "Will you give me a pledge till you send it?" Then he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" So she said, "Your signet and cord and your staff that is in your hand." Then he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So she arose and went away and laid aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting that the narrator knew she was pregnant.
Right.
I'm gonna guess that this child will be important to the story later.
The children will actually show up again later. I don't know if it's relevant at the moment, but we'll get to that. Of the story, what's interesting is Judah turns up and he's like, "Hey, let me come into you." He's like, "What will you give me?" He doesn't actually have anything to give her.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I'll give you a goat from the flock." Okay, but does he have a goat? Apparently not, because he doesn't have one to give her.
Right.
So he must be walking. He must be going to shear his sheep with somebody else taking the flock ahead of him,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe behind him. So he's going alone. He has nothing to give her. So she says something really interesting, and she's like, "Well, give me a pledge until you send it." Now, here's the interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple situations in it here where the story only works out. We're going to get to another one later. The story only works out if you know what's going to happen from behind. Okay, so for example, she says, "What pledge will you give me?" Basically saying, "Give me something now so I know that you'll send me my payment later."
Right.
Right? Well, you could have given something in a pledge, like a cloak, right? But sometimes you would give something, in this case, like your ID. She asked for the signet and the cord. This is basically a signet, a seal, a roller. You would put a cord through it. You would wear it around your neck, and there's an engraving on it. And what would happen is, when you wanted to sign something, you would roll this over a piece of clay, and it would have your signature basically imprinted on it, right? So this is what you would use to tell somebody, like if you sent a letter to somebody or whatever, you would use this to indicate that it is actually from the person it purports to be from, right? So she basically takes the equivalent of his ID as a form of collateral.
Aren't those easy to make counterfeit?
No,
They're not.
it was easy for me because I have a 3D printer, but they would have had to make one identical by hand, and that wasn't, because that wasn't very easy to do. He would have had to find a piece of clay that had that seal already printed in it, to take it to a craftsman and have them reverse engineer it, basically.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And that was not.
It could, I'm sure it could have happened,
Mm-hmm.
but it's very laborious.
Mm.
So the fact of the matter was, she asked for a very important thing, his ID, so that he can be identified later in the story, so that she can put egg on his face, right? Now, here's something, okay? Imagine that she goes and she does this. She lays by the road, he comes along, she says, "Hey, what will you give me?" And he just gives her the goat up front.
Mm-hmm.
So she never has his
Right.
ID. How different does the story turn out? She might have sons by this man,
Right.
but she has no way of identifying who those sons are,
Mm-hmm.
which means this whole thing is a bit of a freaking gamble. If he came with payment in hand,
Yeah.
she would have had to figure out another way of getting his identification.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how that would have looked like. So this is one of those small details you're like, that only works if it's a safe bet that he would not have payment on him.
So you're saying it only works if it's not true.
No, it could be true. It could be true that she knew he would be traveling alone. We don't know that,
Yeah.
right? Because remember, the word comes in the previous passage. It says that somebody told her, right? It says, now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers in Timnah, he and his friend Hira again, because they're always together. And it was told to Tamar, say, look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So it's possible that she knew he would be traveling alone or without his sheep. We don't really know.
And it's possible she knew he was a horn dog.
Well, I mean, she was married to his despicable sons, right?
Just seems like there's a lot of coincidences, things that had to line up perfectly, or else she, as you said, would have had children and nobody to pay for them.
Right. Well, and here's the other interesting thing. Okay, so Judah goes up to Timnah, presumably by himself. I don't know who took his sheep. Maybe Hira took the sheep ahead of him, right? Or maybe he went up to Timnah and his sheep are being sheared and he's doing something else in the meantime. Maybe he's traveling to go buy something. I don't know. But what's weird to me is he turns aside to sleep with this prostitute, but he did not think ahead to bring payment with him, which means when he went to Timnah, it seems to me that he did not initially have the intention of sleeping with a prostitute. Right? Or else he would have brought payment.
Right.
Okay. If it's the case that he never had the original intention to sleep with a prostitute, then what is the thing that triggered his desire to sleep with this prostitute? If she was veiled, if he could not recognize who she was, then what was the thing where he said, oh man, I've got to have that? Like, was it she showing too much ankle? Like what was the thing? He couldn't see her face. I'm trying to figure out what led this man who wasn't going to sleep with a prostitute, didn't have any money for a prostitute.
Here's what I think.
Yeah.
I think that maybe he didn't know it was Tamar, but she really did remind him of her. And he was into that.
It's possible. It's very possible. But if that's the case, if it's the case that he knew it was Tamar.
No, didn't know it was Tamar.
Oh, I'm sorry. Say that. Say that again.
It was somebody who resembled Tamar.
Oh, but you don't think he would recognize her?
I mean, you're probably not going to think that she would do this, right?
Right, but wouldn't you recognize your daughter-in-law?
Would you?
I think I would.
He's pretty self-absorbed. Doesn't even know what his kids are doing.
I think I would recognize every one of my family members' wives. From my brother to my nephews, I would recognize their wives, even if I didn't see their face. If I only heard their voice, I would be like, yeah, I know that voice.
Maybe she did not use her real voice.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there are ways around this.
Maybe she modulated her voice.
I'm not saying this story is true or makes any sense at all, but there are some ways around it.
But it could happen. Remember, Elizabeth Holmes did that. The lady who created the Theranos company that defrauded people out of like millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
She would artificially lower her voice because she knew from psychology studies that women with higher voices do not get taken seriously. The lower your voice is, the more likely you are to be associated with somebody who is authoritative, because a man's voice is low and deep. Just like men with lower voices are more respected,
right,
than men with high voices.
Yeah. That's an interesting point.
So we know that people have the ability to modulate their voice. Maybe that's what she did. Maybe she veiled herself, covered her face completely, modulated her voice good enough to trick her father-in-law, and that's how she got away with it.
I mean, you're not really going to know somebody if you don't see their face.
Plus, we do not know the nature of this sexual encounter, right? We don't know how many words were exchanged. We don't know what happened between the two of them. Was this a quickie where she just bent over and lifted up her skirt? Or was this like a whole romp in the hay where they were laying with each other and rolling around buck naked? Or, you see what I'm saying? Like, we don't fully know the nature of the encounter. But to me, I find it hard. I do find it hard to believe that he would not recognize his daughter-in-law,
Yeah, I'm just saying maybe he just didn't want to recognize her.
Right.
He just wanted to try to convince himself it was somebody else.
That's a good point. Maybe he had an inkling that it was her, but he pushed it aside and threw caution to wind. Or maybe he did know it was her and just didn't care anyways. He was so horny. he had imagined doing this for so long that he was like, I'm just going to throw caution to the wind. What are the odds that she'll get pregnant? You know what I mean? Like, she's 30-something years old now. She's been waiting for 15 years for Sheila to grow up. And you know what I mean? It's possible that the old horn dog, especially because his wife was dead now, he hadn't been getting laid.
So you think that Judah knew who she was, but Tamar did not know that Judah knew?
Here's the thing. In reality, I don't think either one of them knew. If it's true that Judah knew her identity, there's no way he would have given her a pledge of his signet ring and cord. There's no way, because that is the one way that if she becomes pregnant, she ties that back to you, and then you're on the hook, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I don't think in this narrative that she actually knew or I don't think he knew who she was.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, he's the dumbest character in the entire Bible.
There's a lot of dumb characters.
There's a couple dumb ones for sure.
But that is true, isn't it?
Right, man.
And well, that says it right there.
It does, right?
And it's too bad you don't have an ink pad.
I mean, I could get one.
Because it would be sweet to see what yours looks like. Did you put your name on it?
What?
Put your signet.
Oh, this? No. This is one from ancient Babylon, and I forget what's actually on this one. But this is one that is from the British Museum. I got a 3D model for it on the computer, and I smoothed it out a little bit on the CAD software, and then I 3D printed.
So is that somebody's signature?
Well, that one is not. That's a cylinder seal. This one is an actual signature. This one's much smaller. This will be similar to a cylinder seal, but this would actually be for an actual individual, most likely a king.
Well, doing that.
I don't know why you hit your microphone every 5 minutes.
So,
you know it's in front of you, right?
Yeah.
You can see it.
So what's the point of that one, that black one?
Oh, well, some of these, for example, this black one, right, shows a scene. Some of these were just for communicating parts of the mythology. Right?
Like little stories?
Yes, like mini stories. Just like a painting, right? You ever see paintings of the biblical characters doing something?
Yeah.
Entire narratives are communicated through painting sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these old cylinder seals were the same way. This is how you can depict artwork over the course of history. You have one of these and you can roll it. It tells the story. You can read the narrative. In fact, this one's got text on it. You barely see it, but you've got Akkadian text on the cuneiform. It's got a cuneiform text on the side of it. So it's not just imagery built into it. There's actual Akkadian text that has writing. So you could actually tell a narrative in this particular, a mini narrative in this particular form.
That's very cute.
Right?
Okay. That's unrelated to things, but that's very neat.
Interesting, huh?
It is. Mm-hmm. Nowadays we just use...
Right, yeah, of course, yeah.
Whatever. All right. We good?
20 through 23 sounds like what's coming up,
23.
right?
23. And Judah sent the young... You waited until I was doing that to drink, but we're live, so it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter anymore. I don't know why.
All right, 20 to 23. And Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend, the Adullamite, Hira, to receive his pledge, and the woman's hand. Oh, from the woman's hand. They're not getting married. But he did not find her. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, "Where is the harlot who is openly by the roadside?" And they said there was no harlot in this place. So he returned to Judah and said, "I cannot find her." Also the men of the place said there was no harlot in this place. Then Judah said, "Let her take them for herself, lest we be shamed. For I sent this young goat, and you have not found her." So this is Judah embarrassed that he was caught having sex with the prostitute? No. Prostitute? No. He's just embarrassed that he couldn't find her afterward, right?
Well, this is a little bit of a puzzle, okay? Because he's obviously not, well, we don't know if he's embarrassed about sleeping with a prostitute because he sends the payment of the prostitute with his friend Hira, right? So obviously Hira knows what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens is Hira talks to the locals about, hey, you know where this prostitute is?
Yeah.
Like, oh, we don't know, right? Is it possible that he put his friend up to this because he was embarrassed by his actions and didn't want to be caught red-handed, you know?
I understand what you're saying. I think the only reason he did it was because he was Judah.
Judah's a jerk?
No, he's a big timer.
He's trying to preserve his image?
No. He's Judah. Isn't Judah kind of a big deal?
Well, he will be.
Yeah, but he's from the lineage of Jacob. I'm sure everybody knows him. He's like, dude, that's the guy.
I think they did know who they were. Remember when they killed all the Shechemites? It says that fear of them spread throughout the land.
Yeah.
Right?
So, I mean, I just think this was a case of, you know, sending somebody to do your work for you because, you know, you're too powerful for that.
I mean, I don't think you're wrong. I think it could be a case of him just sending someone to do your dirty work because you have the power and authority to do so.
Yeah, like he wasn't embarrassed.
But the guy who did it, remember, was his friend, Hira the Dulamite, right? Yeah. Which they seem to be partners in crime.
They do.
This whole time, right?
Yeah.
Do I think that he's embarrassed of what he did with her? Maybe. But he seems to be more embarrassed by the idea that he would have been considered a non-paying customer.
Huh.
Right?
That's interesting.
This is the other part of the puzzle I can't figure out. It says that, so his friend returned to him and says, I cannot find her. So also the men of this place said that there's no harlot in this place. And so Judah said, let her take them for herself, lest we be ashamed. Okay, what does he mean, let her take them?
I assume his signet and staff and all that.
Right, that's the thing, because he sent one young goat, which means when he says let her take them, he's not referring to the goat.
Right.
He's referring to the signet, right? So then Judah says, let her take them, the signet and the cord, lest we be shamed, for I sent this young goat, and you have not found her. So it seems to me that he still doesn't know who she is, and is thinking to himself, like, let's get the hell out of here, because this lady now is both unpaid and has my ID.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
Right?
I just thought that the idea would be that the other prostitutes would think this guy's such a bad lover that she gave up a goat just to not see him again.
No.
And then Judah would be stuck only having sex with his wives and concubines.
Right. I think Judah was saying, like, hey, let's drop the matter.
Yeah.
And not turn up again.
So what's he going to do, though? I mean, how's he going to prove who he is? He's got to make another one and all that, right?
Well, it's possible that he already had multiples made.
Okay.
Like, if you had one made, it's probable that you probably had a backup made at the same time.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't fully know, right? It's possible that he's got the clay imprint as well, that he could take to somebody and have another one made, right? And the cord's not a problem. He can get a new cord.
Okay. What about the staff? Was that special?
Staff was special, but again, he can get another one, right? But the fact of the matter is, he's got to be at this point at least a little bit in a panic, because the woman that has his ID cannot be found. Not only that, no one knows who she is, and he's going to be known. People know that he's looking for a young prostitute to pay her still.
Right.
So it's possible he's like, listen, these people know that I'm sleeping with prostitutes now, and I'm not paying them. Let's hope this lady does not turn up.
Yeah.
But the narrative itself is not very clear on the first read. Like, what exactly is he saying when he says, let her take them for herself, lest we be ashamed? Like, maybe he's going to be ashamed whether he gets his stuff back or not. Right? if people find out he slept with a prostitute.
Right, and I mean, she has his ID, so
Right.
how else did she get it?
Because even if he gets those things back, she can easily say, I did this thing.
Well, then nobody would believe her.
Right. Or they might not care because she doesn't have the ID anymore. She doesn't have the ability to say she did it.
Right.
Right. Anyways, I don't know. There are some questions on that passage because it's not worded very well. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. We should probably look at the message and see what it says.
That's what I would do.
That's usually
that's a real study Bible.
Easier to understand. Nothing wrong with the message.
That's they need to start reading that in church. The message.
Oh, wouldn't that be sweet? I think you get a lot of the younger people coming back.
Oh, good grief!
All right, let's see.
24.
24. And it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry. So Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. Cold-blooded.
Rough.
Man, Judah's face is going to be so red when he realizes he sentenced his own prostitute and baby to death.
Yeah.
I think that a woman cheating on her husband is death, or the law says something like that, right?
Yeah, both in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. It's Deuteronomy 22. It says that if you're caught committing adultery, that you will be stoned. Now, here's the interesting part. It doesn't say that you'll be burned alive. The only case of this that we find is in Leviticus 21:9, where it says that if a priest's daughter defiles herself by becoming a prostitute, then she disgraces her father and must be burned in the fire. So, as far as I can tell, the crime is not as much adultery as much as prostitution. If the only crime she committed was committing adultery, which, to be clear, she did, because she was still under the headship of Judah, which means she cheated on Shula, because she's supposed to be waiting for him to be of age.
Yeah, but everybody knew that wasn't going to happen.
Well, it doesn't matter if everyone knew it. Actually, nobody knew it. It was only between Judah and Tamar, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but the fact of the matter is, by law, he was still her authoritative headship because she belonged to his third son, right? By law.
Okay.
So the fact that she slept with somebody else was adultery, but adultery alone does not get you burned in fire. That gets you stoned. What does get you burned in the fire is being an actual prostitute. And it seems to me that that's why he shouted to burn her. Now, remember, the law of Moses has not been given yet, which means this provision must have been somehow known or somehow common in that region. That the penalty for prostitution, especially if you're married, is to be burned alive.
Are you trying to say that being burned alive is worse than being stoned?
Oh, that's a great question. I did make that assumption. Yeah. Sorry. Maybe I shouldn't. Which one do you think is worse?
I mean, it's really a hard question, Really depends on, it depends on many factors. Yes, being burned alive would be terrible, but I'm told that your nerve endings burn away pretty quickly.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. I mean, okay, but once your skin has been burned off, do you feel pain because your internals are burning? Do you lose consciousness in the heat?
I have no idea. But I just feel like when you're stoned, the only way, it's going to hurt up until the end unless somebody chucks one right at your temple or something. You know what I mean?
I do think, I've never been stoned before, but I do think if you get stoned, you're probably conscious for most of it.
Yeah.
Until you take a big one to the head.
Yeah.
Is that when you... Either that or your internal organs are so bruised that you die of internal bleeding and you're conscious for the whole thing? Is it? I'm not really sure how it works.
Yeah, I don't know which one is worse.
They sound awful, both of them.
They really do.
Right. That's one of the complaints I always had with the capital punishment in the Old Testament. God could have said, when these people receive capital punishment, you will just cut their heads off. Boom, done. They had axes, they had swords.
Yeah, but this is some sort of deterrent, right?
It's supposed to be.
It's like a public execution.
Well, I do believe getting your head chopped off would be a deterrent.
Yeah, but it's, it's done. You know what I mean? With this, people get to, participate. You know what I mean? The whole spectacle.
The whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I'm just saying,
Well, I mean, I guess, word to the wise, I mean, don't be committing prostitution while you're married, I guess.
Or promised to be married at some point in your life, possibly.
And now this is the reason why I say it's almost guaranteed that Judah did not realize who he was sleeping with, right?
Yeah.
Or else he would not have said burn her, because when they found her, he would have known that she had the receipts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. See if there's anything else on this passage. No, I didn't write anything else on there. Did you have anything else? Okay, 25.
45. When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, "By the man to whom these belong, I am with child." And she said, "Please determine who these are, the signet and cord and staff." That's pretty hilarious. Judah's probably like, "Oh, crap."
Yeah. I love like the cunningness of this woman. Listen to the words that she said. By the man whom these belong, I am with child. She knows who they belong to. Now she's just playing it up. She's like, I don't know who these belong to. I'm just a dumb prostitute woman. Can you tell me who these belong to? You know what I mean? So she's hamming this up really well. This is one of my favorite scenes in like the entire book of Genesis. Because nowhere else do we see like a jerk really getting confronted and outsmarted by somebody.
Especially a woman.
Especially a woman, and especially a woman who seems to be deserving of some form of justice. And I love that Tamar displays a super, super high intelligence. Second to none. She appears to be the smartest person in the entire book of Genesis. But so not only will she have an opportunity to save her late husband's estate through her child, but now she also gets to embarrass her father-in-law for his poor behavior. Now here's one thing though. As I was reading this story, remember there's a couple like items in the story that are rather coincidental that need to work out for the story to work out. This is kind of one of them as well. Okay. How messed up would it be if this whole in the story, if she got pregnant, okay, by Judah, which is what she wanted, right? And then she had a daughter.
I mean, it's not unheard of for daughters to inherit property, right?
Well, it depends. They're not given automatic inheritance. They're only given inheritance if the owner of the estate explicitly allows for them to own it. And her
you told me there aren't any laws you can pull up that say the daughter doesn't get anything?
There are. Most of the ancient Near Eastern law codes state that when the husband or the father dies, that the estate is split between the sons. Okay. There are a couple ancient Near Eastern law codes where it does say that it'll be split between the sons and the daughters. But it's not universal, actually. A lot of the ancient Near East was similar to the Bible, where it says that it would be just between the sons. But that being said, from a biblical standpoint, the estate is never split with the daughters, ever. We never see, there's only one instance in the book of Numbers where Moses allows the estate to go to a woman.
Okay.
And the only reason why this happened was specifically so that the guy who passed away, his name would not be blotted out from Israel. It was not so those women could live. It was only to preserve the name of that man who was the last one standing. So according to the Bible, you did not get to inherit property if you're a woman unless someone explicitly gave you that property. It was not given to you automatically. Right. So anyways, if it happened that she went through all this trouble She got pregnant, and then she had a freaking daughter. This whole thing, none of it would have worked.
Right.
Because remember, even in the Levirate law that we read, the whole goal is so that the first son that you bear with your dead brother's wife will, inherit the estate. So if she did not have a son, all of this is for naught.
Right. Do we find out later?
We're about to.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, let's read 26.
Oh, then that means I already read it.
Yeah.
Didn't understand it. Great.
Mm-hmm.
26. So Judah acknowledged them and said, she has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah, my son. And he never knew her again. He's like, I'm out of here.
Right.
Yeah, that's it.
So technically, as far as I can tell, she got what was owed to her by most of the ancient Near Eastern law codes, right? In this case, she may have broken the law of committing adultery according to the Jewish law, but remember the Jewish law hadn't been given yet. And according to the ancient Near Eastern law codes that we read, this was okay to get a son by your father-in-law. No problem there. So despite what was in the law of Moses, according to the current laws of the land, it seemed to be just fine. So as far as I can tell, she didn't do anything wrong at all. And so not only did she not do anything wrong through this whole story, but she completely outsmarted her father-in-law. And when Judah says that she is more righteous than I think he's saying the truth. I think he's saying that she did in fact act righteously. I don't think he's just trying to abase himself to receive some sort of, pity or escape his punishment.
Or maybe that's just what the narrators wrote for him.
Could be. Could be. But he does acknowledge that it was my fault. I did not give her my son.
Yeah.
And so she did what she had to do to be taken care of, which was my responsibility.
You think if she has a daughter, he'll still do the right thing?
I don't think so. If this woman has a daughter, it's hard to say what would have happened, but I think she still would have embarrassed him. She still would have said, listen, I'm pregnant. Everyone knows I'm pregnant. They're going to burn me at the stake, but guess who impregnated me? Right. So she still would have embarrassed him, but she still would, theoretically, we don't know if she would have gotten any of her dead husband's estate.
I mean, she'd have to embarrass him or else die.
She could have negotiated, right? What if she did this? What if she said, listen, I will, rather than embarrassing you, if you give me a portion of your dead son's estate, we'll cancel all, cancel everything out.
Wouldn't people say, hey, Judah, why are you doing that?
We don't know. Don't know.
She's a female.
But it seems like people knew that she was playing the harlot.
Yeah.
Right? So somebody would have known something.
Yeah, I don't know how that worked when I felt like she only had sex with Judah, right?
Right.
And she had a veil. So
I guess when you become pregnant, people start asking.
Yeah, I guess they did.
But how did they know that she played the harlot and got pregnant? Who did she tell?
That's what I'm saying.
She had to have told somebody. She was probably so elated with herself when she got pregnant. She told one of her girlfriends. Mm-hmm. One of her girlfriends told one of her husbands. And, before you know it, bad gas travels fast in a small town and everyone knew.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm thinking.
I believe it.
Yeah.
So am I to expect lengthy stories about all the 12 brothers, or are we just learning about Judah? Because clearly the biblical authors were from...
Nailed it. Yeah, most of the stories of the 12 sons are sparse, and we don't get long narratives about each one of the 12 sons. But honestly, as we already discussed, Judah was the last and the greatest keeper of the narrative. So I think it's no surprise that Judah plays such a large, prominent role.
Now, who were the tribes that made up the north?
There's a bunch of them. There's Naphtali, Zebulun, Ephraim, Dan, Issachar.
So they all survived, right?
They did survive, yeah.
Well, and they had a hand in writing the Bible, yes?
Well, that's the thing is they were all wiped out by the Assyrians in like 720, between 720 and like 680 BCE, they were wiped out and deported.
Okay.
Which means, and remember, most of the biblical texts that we have come from after that time period, when Judah ruled the whole roost. But it is true that a lot of the Israelites from the north, they did migrate into Judah when the Assyrians came to attack, right? Okay. So a lot of the northern tribes actually assimilated into Judah in order for their own survival, which means a small portion of the Judeans would have been hostile towards the Judeans completely wiping out the northern history.
Right.
So you can only edit the northern history so much before somebody's like, hey, I don't think this is a good idea.
Yeah, but if there's overwhelmingly Judeans, I mean, what are you going to do, right?
Right. And as we've said, I think that's why we see Judah so prominently displayed throughout the Old Testament, because, I mean, they were the ones that wielded the pen. You know?
Get that. 27 to 30. Now it came to pass at the time for giving birth that, behold, twins were in her womb. And so it was, when she was giving birth, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, this one came out first. Then it happened that, as she drew back his hand, the other brother came out unexpectedly, and she said, how did you break through? This breach is upon you. Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on him, and his name was called Zerah. So Tamar gives birth to twins with names we never hear about again. And apparently one had his hand out first, but then the other was like, nah, I'm going to get out of here first, and beat his brother into being born. I assume this will become relevant later. It's interesting that they had to tie a ribbon around the kid's hand to know who is older. You wouldn't want to accidentally treat them equally just because they're twins and born seconds apart.
So remember the narrative that we've discussed a couple times in Genesis of the prominence of the second son kind of being chosen? Interestingly enough, we see that again here. Just like the twins Jacob and Esau, it was the second son who gained prominence. In this case, it is both of these clans do become prominent clans of Judah. But Perez actually is the clan. That's the child that was gonna come second, but supplanted his brother and decided to come anyways. And you know, what's the word? Move his brother out of the way. But that is the clan that David actually comes from. So Perez is in the lineage of King David. So I suspect part of the importance of this narrative is not just preserving the lineage of David, but also, again, there's some what's the word? There's some subtext here again about the second son representing Judah and Israel, but Judah as the second son being prominent. Because remember, Israel, according to history, was the first son, and Judah the second son, Judah the favored, right? So anyways, perhaps this is why there seems to be parallel stories as well with David and Tamar. So remember, we noted there's a lot of crossover points in this chapter with the narrative of King David and his children and whatnot. I think that this ends on a similar note that it started with. There's a lot of hints in the narrative about King David. It kind of starts with those hints, and then it ends with people that were in the lineage of King David. Makes sense?
Sort of.
So they do become important later, but they're not really important to the immediate context.
Hey, was Joseph one of the 12 tribes?
Yeah, Joseph was one of the 12 tribes, but interestingly enough, he does not get an allotment of land. Joseph's lands actually get split between his two sons, which is Manasseh and, I forget the other one.
Because he died or something?
That's a long story. There's a divided opinion on the tribal allotment of Joseph and how that all panned out.
Yeah.
And obviously archaeologists and biblical scholars don't actually agree on what happened in real life. But yeah, the two tribes of Joseph inherited the land as two separate tribes as opposed to one tribe of Joseph.
Yeah, that's weird.
Isn't that interesting? I think it was Ephraim and Manasseh were the two tribes. Because Ephraim is not a child of Jacob, if I remember correctly. That's a child of Joseph.
Okay.
But we'll get to that when we read about the tribal allotments.
When is that?
Exodus. We'll start reading some of that, yeah.
Oh, I am so excited.
Yeah, and then they show up again in the book of Joshua, and the book of Judges.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, very exciting stuff.
Is Genesis like the longest book in the Bible?
It's one of the longest. It's quite long. Exodus is long as well. Numbers, not quite as long. Leviticus, not quite as long, but it feels longer because you're just reading law codes. Deuteronomy is quite long. It's 30-something chapters. But yeah, Genesis is it's a long one. It's a slog.
Like 60, maybe 50 chapters, right?
Right. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
49 or 50, I forget. I think it's 49.
I think it's 50.
It's probably 50. Anyways, do we have anything else we need to add to this story, or did we beat the horse completely dead?
I'm pretty sure it's dead.
Yeah.
Dead.
I think so. Well, thanks for watching. This video will be posted permanently on the channel, so feel free to go back and rewatch. And if you think we missed something in the story, please let us know. Remember, as we're reading through these stories and making our comments and whatnot, we're kind of learning as well. Like we're not pretending to know everything. We're just trying to read the text, see what we can find.
Yeah, well, this is the first time I'm reading these, so
yeah, for you,
I'm definitely learning things.
I read it a few times, but so all of us are here learning together, which means even you people in the comment section have something of value to add. We can learn from you every bit as much as you think you might be able to learn from us. So definitely, please add your opinions and add your comments to the videos, because we will go back and read them. And I've had a number of occasions where somebody mentioned something in the comments where like, oh, that's a really good thought I didn't think of. I'm glad that they mentioned that.
Yeah, there was a comment. They mentioned an image that needed changed. So I said, that's a good point.
Right.
And never changed it.
Yeah, that sounds about right. All right, well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.
All right, have a good night.
Exactly.